Genovese, Colombo, Guzman, Soprano. Yes, some of the most famous crime families in the history of the world. Somehow often looked at as heroes, and yet they have inflicted so much pain and suffering around the world, it's unbelievable. Power is about influence, and when you're able to keep that influence and power in the bonds of family, well, it gets supercharged, and it makes that organization even more powerful. But families that have spent generations in politics and finance, well, those are some of the most dangerous families in the entire world. Make organized crime look like child's play, because they're usually able to get away with it. They're seen as the good guys. But in the wake of the FTX collapse, well, it's time to add a new collection of names to that list: the Bankmans, the Frieds, and certainly the Bankman-Frieds. Let's get it. Welcome to BitSquad Crypto. My name is Ben. Make sure to smash that like button. This channel goes deeper into topics than most do. We've got extremely good investigative researchers, and this is a story that you're probably not going to see on many other channels. And one reason for that might be because people are getting kind of tired of the FTX story. It's dominated headlines for so long, but I think it's still okay in doses, and this is one that you need to hear. So we started digging deep into the Bankman-Fried family. And what we found there is this goes much deeper than just the last few years in crypto. Much deeper than SBF, much deeper than just this one fraud. Sam was well connected with the establishment, with both politicians and financial giants. But of course, everything started to fall apart last year. And his family, the true source of his political power, well, they tried to hide behind the scenes. But now the entire Bankman-Fried family, well, they've gone into the spotlight. They've got nowhere to hide. A lot of the things that they've been doing are now seen as very suspicious. Lawyers representing FTX and the bankruptcy, well, they've even called for the parents to come in and testify under oath, find out how they benefited from Sam's position. His parents, by the way, and his family, they're not cooperating with investigators. They're refusing to say anything that they know, even though they were heavily entrenched with FTX and also with Sam in the Bahamas. So let's talk about the Bankman-Fried crime family. We know SBF's parents both had cozy relationships with regulators, but his brother Gabriel, well, he actually played a big role with the fraud that went down at FTX. That's right, Gabriel Bankman-Fried was in charge of all the political donations that FTX was using. A lot of people don't know that. GBF, as we'll dub him, he actually ran an organization called Guarding Against Pandemics. And from the name, you would think that they were actually doing some kind of medical research, but it was strictly a lobbying company. It wasn't about health resources or actually stopping the pandemic from happening again. The money that was coming into his organization, it was all going to politicians under the pretense of a quid pro quo, if you will, that once they're elected into office, that they would make legislation that would prevent future pandemics. But even this gets murky because the main thing they were actually pushing for was an increase in income taxes. It seems like what they did here is they slapped the pandemic research label on whatever they were doing because it was hot and popular at the time, when in reality, all they cared about was political influence. This group spent $3.3 million on a townhouse very close to Capitol Hill, so they could hold receptions for politicians and their staffers, big parties. And of course, didn't matter what side of the political aisle you were on, you were invited. In reality, it was just a giant lobbying group, so they could help politicians win and find favor with them after they assist. Didn't have to do with the pandemic at all. Okay, so they lied. It was smoke and mirrors. It was just a label to get stuff done. Why should we be that upset about it? Happens in Washington all the time. Well, all these parties and receptions and political donations, they were used with your money. And now you don't have it because this is where it was spent. Funneled as a lobbying apparatus, the exact opposite thing of what crypto should stand for. And when you keep tracking the money, you find a lot of dark money flowing into political foundations. Each member of the Bankman-Fried family, well, they had an important role to play in Washington, D.C. They were collectively pushing their family's ideals in lobbying efforts. Like I said earlier, GBF founded Guarding Against Pandemics, the organization, while he was under a congressman. He was on the staff of Congressman Sean Casten. Of course, he was just following in the footsteps of the one that wears the pants in his family, Barbara, his mom, who is the co-founder of the Mind Your Gap lobbying group. Interesting here, Guarding Against Pandemics, GAP. Very interesting. Of course, Mind the Gap has gone under much scrutiny since the FTX collapse. Of course, after it was discovered, the money from FTX, the customer funds, were flowing into that organization. And the brothers, SBF and GBF, well, they actually had a foundation together. It was called Building a Stronger Future. Now, this is starting to look very similar to the shell company architecture that was built to cover the FTX insolvencies. This one just happens to be shell donations and political organizations, lobbying groups. Maybe he was just using the lessons he learned from his family when he constructed the FTX fraud. Now, after all this corruption came to light, the parents and the brother, they had to resign their roles at the lobbying groups and the foundations. However, those groups still exist. That's kind of weird since even though they're not benefiting from those organizations anymore, well, they founded and created them. And with such blatant fraud found in these organizations, shouldn't they be disbanded? Now, it would be one thing if the money from FTX was actually used for good philanthropic purposes. Yes, you would have lost your money, and it's your money, not theirs. But if it's the Make-A-Wish Foundation, okay, like, what are you gonna do? Go take the money back from the kid who needs help? But that's not what this was at all. This was not about philanthropy. This was solely about political connections and lobbying and influence. There was no philanthropy. Remember, guys, if you like this kind of content where we go deep into the story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications. And like this video while you're at it, helps more people to see it. So what's next? Where do we go from here? The corruption we've seen so far, well, it's probably just scratching the surface of what we'll find out down the road. Because the most information gets exposed as the cases move through court. And we recently covered some stories that said that Caroline Ellison and Gary Wong aren't cooperating with investigators anymore. Now, this caused a lot of confusion because people thought this was in regards to the criminal case, but apparently this is in regards to the bankruptcy. They will probably still be testifying in the criminal case. They're not gonna be in trouble for the bankruptcy, they're gonna be in trouble for the crimes they committed, so they care much more about that case. And the Bankman-Fried family, well, they've been fighting like hell to keep investigators out of their personal finances. And of course, their foundations, because they know this is about to pull on a thread that's gonna expose a deep network of corruption. It was reported that Barbara Fried, well, she's ignoring investigators altogether. Definitely looks like a Karen. Shout out to all the real women who are named Karen. I'm sorry that your name turned into a meme, but please don't ask for my manager. And now Gabriel, old GBF, he's been answering the calls of investigators, but he apparently has not been cooperating or giving them any of the information that they've been requesting. But there may be a defector here. Joe Bankman, Sam's father. He actually seems to be a little more willing to talk to investigators. Could he end up actually selling out his own family to keep him from going to prison? At the end of the day, one of these crime family members is gonna have to turn on each other if they want to avoid maximum penalties. If that's not the reason, then why is he the only one willing to talk? We've been seeing some examples that the court is looking to make an example of this crime family. I know this is contrary to what a lot of people are telling you, but this family is not protected. They lost all their goodwill and favor when they had to ask for the donations back, a clawback from politicians. These politicians aren't going to allow them to protect their connections. And now the Bankman-Frieds are pretty much broke and they're seen as toxic and the politicians have to give the money back. What benefit does it provide to anyone to protect them? We know that just recently the judge in the case, well, they said those two co-signers of the bail along with the parents, they're actually going to become public now, which was contrary to the decision that was made earlier. Now we're going to know who is working with this family. It was ridiculous they were ever private before. That seems to be special treatment. They feel entitled to get that special treatment in the legal system, but that's ending. So what lessons did we learn here from this crime family? Sam Bankman-Fried's entire family is corrupt, but they've been able to leverage their influence with politicians, foundations, and lobbying companies to basically do whatever they want and get off scot-free. No accountability. This is something that Sam and Gabriel obviously watched their parents do all the way growing up, which is no surprise. They've turned out just like them. It's brainwashing, if you will. But Sam and Gabriel, they never saw what they were doing as a big deal, so they weren't as careful as the parents. That's why FTX was a very sloppy organization, which is why everything's gonna come out and all be exposed. They didn't work hard to protect what was actually happening. Now this situation has exposed the dark underbelly of politics and finance. And the establishment, well, they've got to do damage control pronto, because it's starting to seem like that corruption is the standard operating procedure, how Washington does business. This is why crypto is so important. And when I say crypto, I mean real crypto, not a centralized exchange ran by bumbling Afroed idiots. Hedge fund incels, if you will. Crypto is the path forward to a more democratized, open, and transparent political system. A democratic and transparent monetary system is what this is all about. We're tired of the smoke and mirrors. Now let me know what you think about this story in the comments down below. Do you think that this family is going to jail? How many of them are going to jail? Who is the worst actor? I want to know your thoughts down below on what's happening in the Bankman-Fried's crime family. That's all I got, people. That's BitBoy out.